I played Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced in Montreal last year before it was announced, and if you'd asked me then whether I wanted to play more of it, I'd honestly have told you no. It felt early, it felt uncertain, and I kind of walked away not really sure what the pitch was for this remake. I really had no idea what it was trying to be. So when Ubisoft flew me out to their Singapore studio last week to play it again a kind of year or so on, I did go in open-minded, but I was also quite skeptical. And this video is the accumulation of that. It's an honest version of what has changed my mind in a positive way, what still hasn't, and whether this is a kind of day one buy or is it a kind of wait and see for a little bit more info kind of game before you do pull the trigger. So let's kind of start where the game first won me back, and that was parkour and movement. Because after sitting down in the chair and booting up for our first session and then reaching Havana, the first thing I noticed inside about 5 minutes was that Edward's movement felt much closer to a modern Assassin's Creed game than the earlier build I played last year. Of course, playing on PC at 4K 60 FPS did help because those transitions between sprinting, climbing, jumping, and landing all kind of flowed together much more cleanly. But this wasn't just a frame rate thing. His recovery is just quicker when he hits the ground. He carries momentum between parkour moves much better, and he no longer has that kind of heavy lethargic feeling I had with the first playtest, or arguably the 2013 game. You do feel that especially with the new zip lines introduced into this game, because they do keep the rooftop parkour routes flowing instead of you having to constantly jump down to get back up again, and that kind of breaks your rhythm or flow when you are parkouring across the map. And if you do combine that with the modern revamp Assassin's Creed controller scheme, I would say, from Shadows, the new manual jump which has been added here, or the side or back eject options you can turn on the settings, Edward kind of starts hopping and launching himself around the world in a way that feels much more satisfying than I actually did expect. As you can see here, I'm throwing him around a lot, and that is a good thing. He did respond really well. Now, it's not perfect because I still had a few Valhalla-ish moments where Edward got caught on scenery, he kind of paused randomly, or just jumped somewhere where I definitely did not ask him to go. But with the progress that they've made in the last year in particular, I am confident a lot of those kind of rough edges can be smoothed out before and after launch, as we saw in Shadows. So my verdict on movement is pretty simple. It's not quite at that Shadows parkour level in terms of performance-wise or fluidity or responsiveness, which I personally do consider the best in the series so far. But this was the first moment where I thought, okay, I can kind of see what you're trying to do here, and it feels pretty damn close to what you'd hope for from a modern Assassin's Creed remake without completely losing the feel of the game that came out over a decade ago. But movement is not the only thing that they've rebuilt from the ground up, because combat also has been rebuilt from scratch, and it's pretty good. Now, after the opening mission, we had roughly an hour or so of free roam around this kind of enclosed area on the map here. And this is where I tried to stress test combat properly for you, because this was probably the system I was most apprehensive about. And that's because Black Flag is one of my favorite Assassin's Creed games, but the old combat loop was very much kill, counter, kill until everybody in the area kind of politely queues up and waits their turn to die. I mean, it's true, it's honest. That's the honest truth, which was fun at the time, don't get me wrong, but it isn't exactly captivating now in modern games, and I don't think that loop particularly works in a modern Assassin's Creed game. Now, Hall, the game director, strongly reiterated to me in an interview that this is not an RPG game either. So that means there's no leveling of your character, there's no gear score, there's no damage numbers, no giant skill tree full of new moves, or any proper builds that you can craft to spice up your offensive output, kind of like Odyssey, Valhalla, or Shadows, really. And that means combat has to find depth somewhere else to keep us captivated, though the timing and the enemy behavior, the tools, the weapons, and how cleanly everything flows then plays a more important role in a game such as this. So no, this game hasn't been turned into Odyssey, Valhalla, or a Shadows 2.0, but it is also not just an old kind of counter kill Black Flag original with nicer animations. It kind of sits in the middle, in my opinion, which is probably where it should be. The main challenge, though, is that enemies now have a defense meter. So rather than just waiting for the old kind of counter prompt to pop up on your screen to kill them, you're going to try and break their guard through multiple perfect parries, perfect dodges, and also the right tools that you've got available. Now, once their defense breaks, you can then trigger these takedown chains, which are those satisfying instant kills back to back. But how far that chain goes depends depends on the specific perk or buff attached to your sword, with the maximum being of 4. So your weapon does matter, but not because it has a huge 300 plus damage increase number attached to it, but because it changes what you can do inside this specific combat loop and how many enemies you can kill in that chain, essentially. Now, the important difference is that enemies can now interrupt that chain takedown combo, which makes things a little bit more challenging. So, for example, we've got the new enemy here called the Demolitionist, and he can throw bombs at you to break this kill streak. And then you've also got the big heavy brutes here, and they just can't have their defense guard broken by basic parries either. So you're gonna have to figure out another way how to kill these guys and stop them from interrupting your kill streak. And this is a big change because the AI is designed to recognize when you're spamming the same moves over and over and over to stop you repeating the same kill streak pattern forever. So it can still look here, as you're watching my footage, like a Black Flag chain killing rinse and repeat on the surface, but there is more going on underneath than the old kind of counter button doing all of the work. And in practice, it does feel much closer to a modern Assassin's Creed game than the original Black Flag, because the movement between kills, parries, dodges, and animations, it does feel a lot more fluid and less robotic. You also have more control which enemy you want to go on to next or target next, which helps it feel less like Edward is just clearing the room on autopilot, if you know what I mean. So in a way, it does feel like Ubisoft Singapore have modernized Black Flag without removing the core identity of Black Flag combat, if that makes sense. And for the most part, I think that is the right call, because you're getting something familiar enough to feel like Black Flag, but it's different enough that it doesn't feel like a more polished 2013 game remake. That said, combat is also where one of my big concerns comes in, which I still have, because I am not fully convinced the challenge ceiling is where it needs to be yet. And I'm going to explain what I mean in a little bit more detail a little later on this video. But before we get there, we need to talk about stealth, because this was another area where the remake felt much less scripted than I had originally expected. Now, the big headline change here with stealth is that Edward can now crouch freely anywhere on the map, which of course does not sound like a massive deal in 2026 when it comes to video games. But in the original Black Flag, stealth was often something that the game gave you permission to use, as you could only auto crouch in certain stealth zones and nowhere else in the game. Whereas in Resynced here, stealth is less scripted, so you can choose when you want to crouch, where you want to move to, hide, and when to abandon stealth completely, which immediately makes missions feel a lot less rigid than the original game. They've also updated stealth detection, which now affects visibility in the game. So if you crouch behind objects or use cover properly, or if you move through darker areas, enemies generally take a lot longer to spot you. And I do need to manage your expectations here though, because this is not Shadows level stealth. You do not become completely invisible in the darkness or in the shadows, and you cannot sprint crouch here, meaning you're not getting the same light and shadow system Naval has, or kind of full ninja movement suite that's available to you, which I do feel is a little bit disappointing personally, because as I mentioned, I still think Shadows is mechanically the best Assassin's Creed game in the series when it comes to stealth and combat stealth in particular. But these changes in Black Flag are still a very strong upgrade from the original. Speaking of which, tailing missions, you know, those missions that you use to follow NPCs in game for way too long, have been changed here. So you no longer instantly get desynchronized or fail the mission if you do get spotted. So you can actually just run straight up to them, get spotted, kill them, and still complete the mission if you want to, which I think is a good change, because if you played the original, you'll know that is a very good quality of life upgrade if you want it. Now, classic tools like your crowd blending, your bench stealth, hiring your dancers, coins, and whistles all return and work as you would expect. And there are some nice new modern touches here as well, like the new double assassination animations. You can put your hood up and down in gameplay, which is great, just not in cutscenes, unfortunately. And the rope dart unlocks much earlier than it did in the original, so this means that you can kind of lasso and assassinate enemies while you're crouched here and hidden in stealth, which is a very good upgrade. It's awesome to do in this game. I will go deeper on the stealth tools in a separate video, but for this one, the takeaway is simple for me. It is not Shadows level stealth, but it certainly is Black Flag stealth with far more control than you've ever had before, because now you can decide when you want to crouch, hide, stalk, and assassinate, essentially, which lets you play the map differently to how you played the original. And I think that is very positive, in my opinion. It's a very good change. But the big question is whether the pirate side of Black Flag has been modernized in the same way. So let's talk about sailing on the high seas right now. In fact, before I forget, drop me a comment with any follow-up questions you have about everything I'm covering here down below, by the way, because as you can kind of see in this clip, I was taking a lot of notes in Singapore. So I've got lots more deep dives, interviews, and exclusive information coming to you over the next few weeks. Essentially what I did for Shadows, but here for Black Flag. So subscribe if you want to know when those videos land. Now, Naval. So after our 60-minute open world session, we were then ported into a new save where we could play the new quest involving Blackbeard, which gave me a solid understanding of the bigger naval challenges that they've made in this remake or that we'll come across. And this was the point where I wanted to know whether they had either simplified naval combat, because it was notoriously quite challenging in the original, or whether they had actually built on what they'd already worked on. And in my opinion, I think they've done the latter. And I say that because every cannon type, as an example, now has a secondary fire mode, so you have more options when taking down enemy ships. And when I used the right fire mode for the right ship in the right situation, sinking them felt really satisfying and very easy to do. However, when I just spammed my cannons without really thinking about what I was loading into them and what I was firing, those same high seas pirate dogfights became much longer and more frustrating than they really needed to be, meaning I actually took more damage, and then I had to board a defeated ship and choose the repair option instead of looting, just to kind of stay in this big fight. Now, after completing Blackbeard's quest, I thought I'd then take on a fort and see what the team has changed there, if anything. And the first thing I noticed is that you can't just sit outside and cheese the fort for free basically anymore without getting hit. They've covered all angles here, and if you hang around too long, you're just going to get sunk, as you can see happen to me here. So the naval side of attacking forts felt a lot better, a lot more improved, more dangerous, and there was a lot more firing and maneuvering on my ship, which was very engaging, to be honest with you. I really did enjoy it. But I do have concerns about the gameplay once you actually enter the fort, because from what I played, the structure still felt very similar to the original. That's when you storm the fort, you reduce the morale meter by clearing the guards, and then you one-shot the captain in his quarters, essentially, with your pistol. And to be honest, I was hoping for a little lick of paint here, something a little bit more substantial. It would have been far more interesting if perhaps you could have swam to the fort in darkness, infiltrating it from the water. You're kind of then stealthing your way inside, and then you take it down like a proper assassin pirate hybrid here, especially because all of the mechanics that I've just mentioned actually are already built into this new version of the game. But instead, once you just sail too close to the fort, you're then locked into combat until you either sail away, you get sunk, or you then dock with the fort itself after defeating all of the cannons. So my verdict on Naval is pretty clear to me, if I'm honest with you. Ship combat has more depth and it feels good. Naval battles against forts feel a lot more challenging and engaging, but the fort interiors still feel like the area where I really did want some more development here, some more creativity as an assassin pirate, because once you've done a few of them, I can see them becoming a bit samey really, where you just end up speed running them for the fast travel unlock on the map, rather than because of the interior itself. It doesn't have anything especially interesting inside. There's no secret loot, or is very fun to do after you've done it a handful of times, and that is a shame, because the ship combat side of attacking them is genuinely good fun. But speaking of fast travel and the wider world in this game, that is a good transition onto the open world, because this is where you can really see the big boy upgrades that they've made to this remake, this resynced version, including some changes that you may not even notice first, because I didn't until it was pointed out to me, which are exactly where the remake pitch, or the reason why this game's been remade in the first place, starts to really make sense. Now, I say that because back in the original, as you'd expect in 2013, there were a lot of loading screens as you navigated around the world. And honestly, this is one of those things that you'll probably just take for granted in Resynced when you play it, if you haven't played the 2013 version recently, because now, thanks to the new Anvil engine that this game is built on, there are no constant interruptions or breaking things up, which means that you can just sail into port, you can then step off the Jackdaw, walk onto the dock, and continue straight into the world like a Jack Sparrow pirate, essentially, without hitting another loading screen or having to wait. And that is one of those changes I only properly appreciated because I played the old game again recently, and it makes the Caribbean feel like a big massive connected place, almost open world here, rather than separate areas that are stitched together by loading screens or pauses. And whilst we're on the topic of immersion, there's also a new ship navigation system which feels similar to the route following tech that we had in Shadows, where you basically can just place a marker on your map and then you can auto sail to that location even if you haven't discovered it. So you can actually send your ship on this autopilot, pick one of the 4 new shanties that they've added into the game via this new cool pinwheel option on your boat, and enjoy the boys singing their hearts out while you basically just chill out and relax and take in the Caribbean on your pirate ship, which is really awesome to do, to be honest with you. Now, they've also added dozens of new handcrafted islands instead of what you may expect, AI generated ones, which is a good thing, which they have new secrets, they've got new Easter eggs, which Justin, one of the game directors, told me, and lots more things to discover. So there is actually something new for you to check out in this game if you want to engage with it, which I really like, because it gives returning players, you OGs, more reasons to kind of explore on top of what was already there in the original. You're going to find something new here. So for me, this is where the remake pitch or resynced or proposal, whatever you want to call it, really kind of started to click, because it's not just that the game looks visually stunning, it's that the world flows better together within each region and section. And for a pirate game built around sailing, docking, exploring, getting distracted, that matters a lot, certainly to me in these type of games. But that's not me saying that everything is perfect, because it's not. So let's go through some of my biggest concerns and thoughts now after wrapping up this playtest in Ubisoft Singapore. Now, there's 3 main concerns that I want to be pretty fair about. And the first is the cutscene pacing. We've heard it a lot over Assassin's Creed games in the last several years, and I don't think that changes here. Now, let me preface this by saying that there's 12,000 lines of new dialogue and recordings in this game, which I think is a great thing. But I did notice some of the newer lines involving Lucy, who is one of the deckhands you can actually bring on board in this game, and her interactions with Edward. Those scenes, they did have unnatural pauses after each character kind of finished speaking. In fact, let me just show you what I mean.
Christ, you're relentless.
I need you.
So you said. You did keep me from hanging.
True.
But that doesn't mean you own me.
Also true.
The Jackdaw.
Now, when asked about my feedback on the day, this was one of the things that I raised with the development team, because it did feel a little bit immersion breaking in places. And I do want to be clear that this is not like a broken mechanic or it's disastrous. It just felt slightly awkward, to be honest with you. And this is being a story-led game where dialogue and rhythm matters, certainly to me anyway. It really did stand out as an obvious issue and a recurring issue throughout the new missions that were shown to us. The second thing for me is the challenge and scaling of combat, because even though I do enjoy what they're trying to do here, and I did see enemies interrupt me proactively more than before, especially compared to the original game, but once you master the parry, dodge and takedown loop, or you start using the rope dart to pull enemies to you, you sweep them to the ground with a lovely nice side kick, and then you trigger the takedown chain, I do feel these on foot on land fights can be trivialized and no scoped really quite quickly, to be honest with you. You can just pretty much cut through anything in front of you. So my concern is not that combat is bad or it's not fun per se. I think it is, and it's certainly much better than last year when I played and the 2013 version. But my concern is that once you hit the ability ceiling, or when you get too good, that challenge might flatten out faster than I would personally like, even cranking the difficulty up to hard. So it becomes very easy to rinse and repeat, even if the enemy AI has been improved. And the third thing is the modern day continuity. I'm not really allowed to talk about narrative changes significantly or lore at the moment. I will soon, but I am allowed to say that the modern day story sections from the original game have been replaced. And when I asked a bit more detail about this, the explanation I got is that the original modern day is still canon. Okay, fine. But these new riffs, or this new mechanic that we saw in Shadows, they are then put into the game to explain the Animus hub side experience tied to where the series is right now. The basic idea is that these riffs focus more on Edward, his alternative histories, and what different characters' lives that he kind of liaised with might have looked if they made different decisions. So my concern here, as someone who has been around with the franchise since the first game, I remember going into the shop, buying it and playing on PC all those years ago, I am finding this kind of explanation with the Animus hub a bit bamboozling, and I think that there's not too much hope for new players unless this is explained very clearly, because otherwise we may end up with a really good pirate game, which is awesome, it's terrific, but we also may end up with a modern modern Assassin's Creed continuity layer that feels more confusing than I think it needs to be. And that would be a real shame, because the actual pirate fantasy underneath this is looking much stronger than I personally expected. So with all of that said, should you buy and play this game, and is it for you? Okay, so based on my short time with it, I was impressed by the progress since my first playtest last year, but also how much work has clearly gone into making this feel new and modern while still respecting the original game. I really did see that. So if you loved the original Black Flag game, I think this is probably the remake that you want. It keeps the Edward Kenway pirate assassin fantasy alive. It improves the feeling of movement, combat, stealth, and it removes some of the most annoying old mission restrictions and gives the thing a proper modern lick of Assassin's Creed paint. Now, if you are newer to the series and you haven't played the old games, this may also feel refreshing to you, because it's much closer to an old Assassin's Creed game, but has been brought into this decade, essentially. I always think that a lot of people look back on these old games with rose-tinted glasses and how amazing they are. If you go back and play some of these old games now, a lot of the stuff in there sucks. So this is upgrading that old game and bring it into a more modern wrapping, which I think is a good thing. Just don't expect a giant RPG, Shadows 2.0 version, or every kind of modern open world system to be included in this game. However, if what you really want is to sail the high seas, board your ships, find buried treasure, assassinate enemies, upgrade your pirate ship, and get properly lost in a beautiful Caribbean world, then yeah, like from what I played, this is a bit of a no-brainer and likely worth your money, in my honest opinion. In fact, even with the concern that I do have, I think this could be one of the easiest Assassin's Creed recommendations for a video game I've made in a long time. Not because anything here is revolutionary or industry changing like GTA 6, for example, but because the team really care and they're rebuilding the pirate fantasy of Black Flag for modern players with new content that respects the original whilst not completely replacing what made the original work, if that kind of makes sense. And that's why I came away more convinced than I honestly would have expected. I wanted to play more because at its core, it's a fun video game. And I think when it comes down to it, I think that's really what we all want, isn't it, right? You want to just hang out after work and just play and switch off and enjoy your video game. I think that's going to tick a lot of boxes for you, certainly would for me. Now, I still have a huge amount I can't talk about yet, but I can very soon. And I'm going to be covering everything I can in the coming weeks in the run up to launch. So do subscribe if you want to find your way back here for those deeper dives more quickly. I promise you some good juicy info coming.
Yeah, boy.
In fact, that next breakdown, depending upon when you watch this video, may be on your screen right now. So give it a click if it's there, and hopefully I'll see you there in a second. If it's not, it will be very soon. I just want to say thanks to Sylvia, Bart, Nawa, the amazing Ubisoft UK team, and the incredible Singapore teams for being an amazing host, very patient with all of us and allowing us to play their game. Very grateful for that. Looking forward to playing more. And I think this time, rum is on me.
Why is the rum gone?